The morphine was gone. The bandages were soaked through with blood. And still they kept coming. Private First Class Desmond Doss pressed his hands against another wound, feeling the warm life seeping between his fingers. The ridge on Okinawa had become a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay twisted in the mud, American and Japanese alike, their uniforms indistinguishable beneath the gore. He had no weapon, never carried one, while others mocked him during training, called him yellow, coward, refused to believe a man could serve without killing. Doss held to his conviction. God commanded him not to kill, but nowhere in Scripture did it say he couldn't save. The artillery had stopped. That meant only one thing. The Japanese were coming. Medic! The cry pierced through the smoke. Always that cry. Always another boy bleeding out, calling for mother, for God, for anyone who might ease the passing. Doss crawled through the devastation, his knees scraping against volcanic rock, found the soldier, tourniquet above the knee, direct pressure on the chest wound, check the airway, move to the next. Always the next. 75 men lay wounded on that ridge. The order had come to retreat, leave the wounded, save yourselves. The rope down the cliff waited, salvation just 50 feet away. Other men were already descending, their duty done, their war survived for another day. But Doss looked at the bleeding men around him and knew his war had just begun. "Please, Lord," he whispered, his hands shaking not from fear but from exhaustion. "Help me get one more." One more became 2, 2 became 10, 10 became impossible to count. The Japanese knew an American remained on the ridge. They hunted him through the smoke and shadows, this ghost who moved between their positions, dragging wounded Americans to the edge of the cliff. Doss had fashioned a rope system, a double bowline knot he'd learned in his Virginia church, strong enough to lower a man down the escarpment. Each journey was a prayer answered and a new one begun. Crawl to a wounded man, drag him across open ground while machine gun fire split the air overhead. Secure the rope, lower him down, return for one more. His uniform was no longer olive drab but crimson. Blood from dozens of men had soaked through to his skin. Some of it might have been his own. Shrapnel had found him twice, but he'd bandaged himself and continued. There wasn't time to stop, not while voices still called out in the darkness. A Japanese soldier appeared through the smoke, rifle raised. They stared at each other for a heartbeat that lasted forever. Doss had no weapon, no defense except faith. The soldier's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, an American artillery shell exploded nearby, and when the dust cleared, the soldier was gone. Coincidence, some would say. Doss knew better. By dawn, he had lowered 75 men down that cliff. 75 souls who would see another sunrise, embrace loved ones, live full lives because one man refused to leave them behind. His hands were raw from the rope, his body broken from the effort, but his spirit soared. He had asked for help to save one more, and God had given him 75. The story should have ended there. The Medal of Honor should have been enough. But for men like Doss, the mission never truly ends while others still need saving. 3 weeks later, the grenade rolled into their foxhole like death's calling card. Doss saw it first. That peculiar object that meant the end of everything, spinning lazy circles in the dirt. His foxhole companions frozen in that eternal second of recognition. No time to run, no time to think, only time to act. He kicked at it, trying to throw it clear, but the explosion came too soon. 17 pieces of shrapnel tore into his legs. The pain was immediate and absolute, white-hot metal burrowing into muscle and bone. But even as he fell, even as his own blood joined the mud of Okinawa, his first thought was of others. "Check Thompson," he gasped to the medic who rushed to help him. He was closer to the blast. They carried him on a stretcher through the combat zone. And even then, even with his legs mangled and his consciousness fading, Doss saw another wounded soldier by the path. "Take him first," he insisted, rolling off his stretcher. "He's hurt worse." The medics thought him delirious. What man gives up his evacuation for another? What soldier, already wounded beyond measure, delays his own salvation? But they didn't know Desmond Doss. They didn't understand that saving others wasn't just his duty, it was his identity. While waiting for the stretcher to return, a Japanese sniper's bullet found him. It shattered his left arm, the bone splintering like dry wood. Now he couldn't walk and couldn't use his arm, but still he refused morphine. Others might need it more. The pain was God's way of keeping him conscious, keeping him ready to help if needed. He fashioned a splint from a rifle stock, the first and only time he would ever touch a weapon, and waited. Around him, the war continued its bloody arithmetic. But in that small circle of mud where Doss lay, something else was being calculated, the measure of a man who wouldn't kill but wouldn't stop saving. There were others like him, scattered across every battlefield where America bled. In the freezing waters off Guadalcanal, pharmacist mate second-class William David Halliburton Jr. worked through the night. The destroyer had taken a torpedo, and men thrashed in oil-slicked waves, their burns so severe the skin came off in his hands as he tried to pull them aboard. 21 years old, a seminary student who joined the Navy to serve as a chaplain but found himself assigned as a corpsman instead. God works in mysterious ways, his mother had written. Now in waters turned black with fuel oil and red with blood, those ways seemed cruel beyond measure. Halliburton dove again and again into the burning sea, each time he surfaced with another sailor, another life pulled from the edge of oblivion. His own skin blistered from the flaming oil. Salt water in the burns felt like acid eating through to bone. But the cries of drowning men drove him back into the water. Just one more. He whispered through cracked lips, the same prayer Doss would pray 2 years later on another ocean, another island. Always, one more. When dawn finally came, 43 men lived because William Halliburton had refused to stop swimming. His hands would never fully heal. The scars would remain until his death, a roadmap of that night written in twisted flesh. But when asked about regrets, he had only one, that he couldn't save them all. This was the brotherhood of the healers, men who walked into hell with bandages instead of bullets, who measured victory not in enemy dead but in friendly living. They wore no special uniform, claimed no special glory. But on every battlefield, in every war, they were the thin line between a wounded soldier and a telegram home. The helicopter was already overloaded when Captain Ed Freeman saw the smoke flare. LZ X-ray, Vietnam, November 14th, 1965. The 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry had walked into a massacre. Surrounded, outnumbered, running low on ammunition and water, their wounded piling up faster than they could count. The landing zone was so hot that medevac choppers refused to fly in. Command wrote them off. Just hold until dark, then maybe they could get someone in. Freeman heard the radio chatter from his unarmed Huey. He wasn't supposed to be there. His mission was delivering supplies to safe zones, not flying into the mouth of hell. But somewhere down in that chaos were wounded Americans who would die without evacuation. The math was simple. His life against theirs. "I'm going in," he told his co-pilot. The first approach took ground fire from 3 sides. Bullets punched through the thin aluminum skin of the helicopter like it was paper. The instrument panel exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. Freeman held the stick steady, touched down just long enough for the wounded to be loaded, then lifted off through a curtain of tracer fire. 14 times he flew that gauntlet. Each trip the enemy adjusted their fire. Each trip they got closer to bringing him down. His Huey returned with new holes, hydraulic fluid streaming from ruptured lines, engines coughing from shrapnel damage. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after 30. But Freeman had found his rhythm: drop low, use the trees for cover, pop up at the last second, land in a different spot each time. Never the same pattern twice. Make them guess. Make them miss. And always, those wounded boys loaded in the back, some already gone, others holding on just long enough to die in the air. But most, God willing, most would make it. By nightfall, he had evacuated 30 seriously wounded soldiers, brought in water, ammunition, medical supplies. His Huey was so shot up it would never fly again, but it had done its job. Ed Freeman had done his job, not because anyone ordered him to, but because down in that hell Americans were dying, and he had the means to save them. Sometimes the heroes wore enemy uniforms. Franz Stigler eased his Messerschmitt 109 alongside the crippled B-17. Through the shattered plexiglass he could see the American crew. The tail gunner slumped dead over his weapon, the waist gunners gone. Blood frozen to the fuselage like crimson ice. The bomber flew raggedly, one engine dead, another streaming smoke. More holes than airplane. December 20th, 1943. The skies over Germany. Stigler had them cold. One burst from his cannons would finish what the flak had started. Another kill mark on his rudder. Perhaps enough for the Knight's Cross he'd coveted since boyhood. But as he moved in for the kill, something made him pause. Through a hole in the fuselage, he saw them. The surviving crew, some wounded, others frantically working to keep their dying bird in the air. Boys, really. Not so different from his own younger brother shot down over Africa. His commander's words echoed, "You follow orders. You destroy the enemy. You never show mercy." But older words surfaced too from his first squadron leader. "You fight warriors, not murder helpless men. If you shoot at parachutes, I will shoot you myself." This bomber was no longer a war machine. It was a parachute carrying boys home. Stigler pulled alongside, close enough to see the pilot's eyes widen in disbelief. He gestured frantically. "Fly this heading, get out of Germany, don't turn back." The American pilot, Charlie Brown, thought it was a trick. Had to be. Enemy fighters don't escort bombers to safety. But Stigler stayed with them, warding off flak batteries who held fire rather than risk hitting a German fighter. He guided them to the North Sea to the edge of safety, then peeled away with a salute. No words could cross the language barrier, but understanding did. Today, you live. Today, we are not enemies but men. Stigler never reported the encounter. To show mercy to the enemy meant death. He told no one for decades. Carried the secret like shrapnel in his heart. 20,000 feet over Germany for a few minutes that would define both men's lives. The war stopped. Humanity won. In Korea, the cold killed as efficiently as bullets. Corporal Joseph Vittori huddled in his fighting hole, feeling the frost creep through his boots, his gloves, his soul. -30 degrees. Breath froze in the air and fell like snow. The Chinese had been probing their lines all night, testing for weakness before the main assault everyone knew was coming. September 16th, 1951. Hill, 749. Another number on a map that men would die to take and die to hold and die to take again. The wars changed, but the arithmetic remained constant. Ground plus blood equals victory. When the attack came, it rolled over them like an avalanche. Thousands of Chinese soldiers flowing up the hillside, their quilted uniforms making them look like an army of ghosts in the pre-dawn darkness. Vittori's automatic rifle chattered until the barrel glowed red, but still they came. His position was the key to the line. If it fell, the entire company would be flanked, rolled up, destroyed. Vittori understood this with the clarity that comes in combat. No grand strategy, no political implications. Just hold this hole or everyone dies. A grenade landed beside him. No time to throw it back. He kicked it down the slope where it exploded among the attackers. Another grenade. This time he caught it, threw it back, playing deadly baseball at 30 below zero. His ammunition ran low. He grabbed rifles from fallen Chinese soldiers, turned their own weapons against them. 3 times the Chinese took his position. 3 times Vittori counterattacked alone, driving them back with a fury that seemed impossible from one man. His parka was shredded by shrapnel. Blood froze to his face from a dozen cuts, but he held. Dawn came like mercy, revealing a hillside carpeted with bodies. Vittori still stood in his hole, surrounded by empty ammunition cans, discarded weapons, and more enemy dead than seemed possible for one man to have killed. He had held the line. The company survived. The hill remained American for another day. They found him still at his post when the sun was fully up, automatic rifle in his hands facing the enemy. The cold had finally won what the Chinese couldn't take. Joseph Vittori had frozen to death standing up, still guarding his position, still protecting his brothers. The letter arrived 3 months after Normandy. "Dear Mrs. Johnson, I am writing to tell you about your son's last day." The words blurred through tears as she read how Private Robert Johnson, 19 years old, farm boy from Iowa, had stayed behind to cover his squad's retreat, how he'd held a crossroads alone against a German counterattack, how they'd found him surrounded by empty ammunition clips and spent grenades, having bought his friends the time they needed with the only currency that mattered. Across America, variations of this letter arrived daily. Different names, different battles, same story. Someone had to stay. Someone had to buy time. Someone's son would never come home so that other sons could. In Italy, Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot performed his own arithmetic of sacrifice. A one-man assault on 3 machine gun nests. A bazooka duel with a Tiger tank at point-blank range. 17 German soldiers captured single-handedly. When they offered to evacuate him for wounds, he declined. His men still needed him. In the Pacific, pharmacist's mate First Class Francis Pierce stayed aboard the sinking destroyer to tend wounded men in the flooding sickbay. The ship listed further with each wave. The abandoned ship order had been given 20 minutes ago, but Pierce had made his own calculation. These men couldn't move. Someone had to stay. The water was at his chest when they found him, still trying to keep a wounded sailor's head above the rising sea. Each name on each memorial represents a choice, a moment when someone decided that others mattered more than self. They weren't born heroes. Heroism found them in extremity and they answered its call. A teacher from Brooklyn became a one-man roadblock in the Ardennes. A mechanic from Detroit drew enemy fire so medics could reach the wounded. A clerk from Seattle charged a bunker to save his pinned-down platoon. This was the democracy of courage. It recognized no rank, no background, no special training. When the moment came, ordinary men did extraordinary things not for medals or glory but because someone had to, because that's what you did, because the guy next to you would do the same. The ceremony was wrong, all wrong. Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez stood at attention as President Reagan read the citation. The Medal of Honor felt heavy on his chest, but not as heavy as the memories. They were calling him a hero for what happened in Vietnam, May 2nd, 1968. But heroes were supposed to feel heroic. All Roy felt was the weight of the ones he couldn't save. The helicopter insertion had gone bad from the start. 12 Green Berets surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. When the first rescue chopper was driven off, Benavidez heard the radio calls from his forward operating base. He wasn't on the mission roster. Could have stayed safe. Should have stayed safe. Instead, he grabbed a medical bag and jumped on the next helicopter. What happened next took 6 hours, but would last a lifetime. Shot in the face, head, and right leg the moment he left the helicopter. Didn't stop, couldn't stop. Men were dying. Dragged half the team to the chopper under fire. Aircraft too damaged to fly. Pilot dead. Had to do it all again. 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds. Clubbed unconscious twice. Presumed dead and almost put in a body bag until he spit blood in the doctor's face to prove he was alive. The citation read like mythology, but Roy knew the truth. He'd simply done what needed doing. The same thing those 12 men would have done for him. That was the brotherhood the politicians never understood. You didn't fight for flags or causes or abstract freedoms. You fought for the man beside you. You bled so he wouldn't have to. You died so he could live, and sometimes, against all odds and reason, you survived to carry the weight of those who didn't. 8 men lived because Roy Benavidez refused to leave them behind. 4 didn't. Their names were carved on his heart deeper than any shrapnel. At night, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, he still heard their voices, still reached for men who weren't there, still whispered the medic's eternal prayer, just let me save one more. The president was still speaking, something about American values and heroism. Roy wasn't listening. He was back in that jungle, blood in his eyes, bodies on his shoulders, doing what needed to be done, not because he was special, but because he was there. Because that's what you did for brothers. They're all gone now, most of them. The boys who held the line, who stayed behind, who chose others over self. Desmond Doss died in 2006, his hands that saved so many finally at rest. Ed Freeman followed in 2008, his helicopter grounded at last. Franz Stiegler and Charlie Brown, the pilot he couldn't shoot down, died within months of each other, their unlikely friendship having lasted 40 years after they finally met again. But their stories remain, not in dusty history books or forgotten archives, but in the lives that continued because of their sacrifice. Every child born to a soldier they saved, every family that remained whole, every future that existed because in one crucial moment someone said, take him first, or I'll stay, or just one more. We live in their debt, all of us. Our freedom, our comfort, our very existence balanced on the fulcrum of their choice. They didn't seek glory. Most would be embarrassed by the attention, insist they just did their job, nothing special. Anyone would have done the same, but we know better. We know that in the arithmetic of war, the hardest calculation is the simplest one. My life for yours. My today for your tomorrow. My last breath so you can keep breathing. Remember them, not as statues or statistics, but as they were. Young men who loved baseball and pretty girls in cars that went too fast, who wrote letters home and kept photos in their helmets and counted days until their tour was done, who in the end gave everything for people they'd never meet, futures they'd never see, a world that would forget their names but live in their light. They were the unsung heroes who died so others could live. And every day we wake up free. Every day we hold our children. Every day we live without fear. We prove their sacrifice was not in vain. Like this video if their stories moved you. Subscribe to hear more about the heroes history forgot. And in the comments below, tell us about someone in your family who served, who sacrificed, who came home or didn't. Their stories deserve to be told. Their names deserve to be remembered, because this channel isn't just about history. It's about honor. It's about ensuring that the price of our freedom is never forgotten. And it's about proving that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who save lives, not